I was standing behind a rose hedge when I heard say my name. I hadn't meant to stop there. I just stepped outside to get some air, to feel the Tennessee sun on my face for 1 minute before I had to go back inside and become a bride. The ceremony was 40 minutes away. My dress was on. My hair was done. My hands were shaking just slightly, the way they always do when I'm nervous, and I thought the garden would help. It didn't help. She grew up in a trailer park, can you imagine? That was Voice, Tyler's mother. The woman who had smiled at me across 17 dinner tables and asked me twice if I wanted the name of her facialist. Her mother came alone. No father in the picture, no family to speak of. I looked her up. Nothing, nobody. I know I should have walked away. I know that. But your feet do a strange thing when you hear your own life being summarized like a disappointing report card. They just stop. They plant themselves in the grass, and they make you listen to every single word. Tyler had options, said. Real options, and he chose this. Laughter, 3, maybe 4 women. One of them was Courtney. I recognized that particular laugh, the one that sounds like it's enjoying something privately. And one of them was Amber, who had been whispering to Courtney all morning with her hand over her mouth like they were 12 years old and this was homeroom. I stood there behind that rose hedge, and I felt something I hadn't felt since I was 12 years old, eating lunch alone in the school cafeteria in Harlan County, Kentucky, wearing shoes that were one size too big because we'd bought them to grow into. That feeling of being made of the wrong material, of being assembled from spare parts that don't belong anywhere near something this nice. I grew up in a single-wide trailer on the edge of a gravel road. My mom, Karen, worked double shifts, diner in the morning, laundromat on weekday evenings. She raised me alone, and she raised me right, and she never once made me feel like our life was a lesser life. But the world has a way of making sure you don't forget. It finds little moments, little hedges, little gatherings of women in expensive shoes who think nobody's listening. I wanted to disappear. I genuinely considered it. I thought about slipping back inside, calling a car, leaving the dress on the hanger in the bridal suite and just driving. Not to anywhere specific, just away from the sound of that laughter. But then my phone buzzed. I looked down, unknown number. Madison, I know this isn't the right time, but I'm nearby and I think you should know I'll be there if you want me to be. I've wanted to reach out for years. I'm sorry it took this long. Robert. I read it 3 times. Robert. My mother had said that name exactly once in my life. I was 16 and I had pushed her, really pushed her, the way teenagers do when they decide the truth is owed to them, and she had said it quietly like she was setting down something heavy. Robert, he's just someone who couldn't stay. She never said it again. I never looked him up because I was 17. Then I was 20. Then I was 26 and building a quiet life in Nashville as a bookkeeper, and the question of where I came from felt less urgent than the question of where I was going. But he had looked me up, and he was nearby. I put the phone in the small satin clutch my mother had lent me, and I walked back inside, and I stood in front of the mirror in the bridal suite, and I looked at myself for a long moment. Clearance rack dress. Hair I'd done with a YouTube tutorial and 2 cans of hairspray. My mother's pearl earrings. And somewhere out there, a woman I'd once hoped might become family was telling her friends I was nobody. My mom appeared in the mirror behind me. She'd been watching from the corner of the room, the way she always watches, quietly, missing nothing. "Don't let them take today from you," she said. I nodded. I picked up my bouquet. I walked down the aisle alone. I had always planned to. There was nobody to give me away, and I'd made my peace with that years ago, decided to reframe it as strength. The string quartet played something soft, and I kept my eyes on Tyler, who was standing at the altar with his hands clasped in front of him. And when he saw me, he pressed his lips together the way he does when he's trying not to cry in public. He's terrible at it. His ears turn red. I loved him so much in that moment that everything else went quiet. In the front row in her champagne dress, Courtney with her perfect posture, the 500 guests on white chairs arranged across the most beautiful hillside I'd ever stood on. All of it went quiet. Just Tyler. Just his red ears. Just the fact that I was about to marry the man who had loved me without conditions or caveats or asterisks. Pastor Greg had a warm voice, the kind built for ceremonies. He talked about covenant and partnership. He said Tyler's name, and then he said mine, and both times it sounded like something worth saying. We were maybe 8 minutes in when I heard it. A hum, faint, from a distance. The kind of sound you feel before you understand what it is. Then closer. Then a thrum, rhythmic and low, and I watched Tyler's eyes track to something just over my shoulder. And then I watched the eyes of the guest in the front row do the same thing. And then the second row, and then it moved through the crowd like a wave, every head turning, slowly and then all at once. The way 500 people turning to look at the same thing is both silent and enormously loud. I turned too. The helicopter came over the tree line at the far edge of the estate. Black, moving with quiet intention, not urgency, like it had all the time in the world and knew exactly where it was going. It descended into the open field beyond the garden, the grass bending flat under the rotor wash, and it settled with a sound that I felt in my chest. The rotors slowed. The crowd was completely silent. A door opened. A tall man in a dark suit stepped out first, broad shoulders, earpiece, the kind of stillness that comes from being paid to be unreadable. He looked at the crowd once, assessed it, and stepped aside. And then Robert stepped out. He was older than any photograph I might have imagined. Silver hair, 60-something, wearing a simple navy suit that had clearly been chosen not to impress anyone. He didn't look like money performing itself. He looked like a man who was nervous, who had made a decision and was walking toward it and was not entirely sure it was the right one but was doing it anyway. I know I should tell you I felt something cinematic. Something that closes the distance of 32 years in a single breath. But the truth is I just stood there, in my clearance rack dress on the most expensive piece of property I'd ever been on, and I watched this stranger walk up the aisle toward me, and I thought, so that's what I get my height from. The crowd parted. I don't think they even realized they were doing it. They just moved back on either side as he walked through, and I heard the murmuring start, that particular sound of recognition, because Robert was not an unknown face. He'd been in Forbes 3 years running. His name was on a building in downtown Nashville, and now he was walking up the center aisle of his daughter's wedding in a field in Tennessee with quiet, terrible dignity. Had stood up, then she sat back down, very slowly. Courtney had her hand on Amber's arm. Tyler looked at me. I didn't look back. I was watching my father walk toward me. He stopped a few feet away. He didn't use a big voice. He didn't perform it. He just spoke to me, the way you speak to someone when there's no version of this that isn't complicated, and you've decided that complication is not an excuse. I know I have no right to be here, he said. I know I missed everything. But I heard what was said about you this morning, and I have people, staff, that's not an excuse. I know how that sounds, but I heard. And I couldn't stay away. You deserve to walk into this family knowing exactly who you are. You're my daughter, and I am so proud of you. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. He held out his arm. I want to tell you I deliberated, that I waited, that I thought about the 16 years of silence and the one name spoken once in a kitchen in Kentucky, and the father-shaped hole I'd spent most of my life papering over with stubbornness and forward motion. I took his arm. He walked me the remaining 20 feet to the altar. Tyler was crying. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. His whole face was just open, undone, the most honest I'd ever seen him look in public. He reached out and shook Robert's hand and said something quiet that I didn't catch, and Robert nodded, and then he stepped back to a seat in the last row and he sat down. Pastor Greg cleared his throat. He looked out at 500 people who had completely forgotten what they were there for. Shall we continue? We continued. I do not fully remember the vows. I remember Tyler's voice. I remember how his hands felt warm and a little sweaty, which I chose to find endearing. I remember thinking that I had almost run, and I was so glad I hadn't. I remember the moment Pastor Greg said, "Husband and wife," and the crowd erupted, and Tyler kissed me with the kind of enthusiasm that made someone in the third row whistle, and I laughed into his mouth. And for approximately 45 seconds, I was the happiest I had ever been in my life. Then the reception. Robert stayed for 1 hour. He sat at a table near the back with his assistant and a glass of water, and he did not work the room. He did not introduce himself to anyone. He waited until I found my way to him, which I did eventually, between the first and second round of toasts. We sat across from each other and talked for 12 minutes. I counted, somehow, the way you count strange time. He told me he had known about me since the beginning, that he and my mother had made a decision together. She had wanted a quiet life. He had been building something that was anything but quiet, and the agreement between them had been her choice, not his imposition. He said he had respected it for years. He said he had stopped respecting it about 5 years ago and had started trying to reach out, but my mother had asked him to wait until I was settled. He looked at me steadily when he said all of this, the way someone looks at you when they want you to know they're not softening it. I appreciated that. I come from a woman who doesn't soften things. I asked him why today. Why not a letter, a phone call, a less theatrical entrance? He said, because of what they said about you, and because you were about to walk into a family who needed to understand what they were getting. I didn't know whether to be grateful or annoyed. I settled on both. He left before the cake. He shook Tyler's hand again on the way out. He paused at my mother's table, and they looked at each other for a long moment, all those years compressed into a look, and my mom said something I couldn't hear, and he nodded, and he walked out. I watched him cross the lawn and step back into that black helicopter and lift away over the tree line and disappear. Found her way to me at the end of the night. She had recalibrated by then, I could see it, the careful of a woman who processes information and adjusts her performance accordingly. She was warm. She was gracious. She said she hoped Madison knew she was already part of the family. I thanked her. I meant none of it. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired in the specific way you feel tired when you've been performing adequacy your whole life, and the performance has suddenly, unexpectedly, become unnecessary. Courtney left early, Amber with her. Tyler found me around 10 o'clock, standing outside near the rose garden, shoes off, grass under my feet. He put his jacket over my shoulders and stood beside me and didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I think I might be better than okay. I'm not totally sure yet." He laughed. He put his arm around me. We stood there in the dark on a Tennessee hillside, married 4 hours, the string quartet long packed up and gone, the last guests drifting to their cars, and I thought about a little girl in shoes one size too big eating lunch alone in a school cafeteria in Harlan County. I thought about how far she'd walked to get here. She'd walked every step of it alone. No father, no hand to hold. Just a mother who worked double shifts and told her she looked like somebody, and a stubbornness that nobody had managed to take yet. The helicopter didn't give me that. Robert didn't give me that. All he did was arrive, finally, late in the loudest possible way, and confirm what was already true. I was never nobody. I just hadn't made them prove it yet.